And welcome to panel two of the
Bienvenidos al segundo
and
panel de la
welcome to
conferencia
panel
del
two of
13 de
the
abril del
April 13th,
2024 del Instituto Schiller
2024 Schiller Institute
sobre el
online
plan
conference on
Oasis, la
the
solución
Oasis
de la
plan,
RUSH
the
para
LaRouche
la paz
solution
y el
for peace through
desarrollo
development between
para
Israel and
Israel y
Palestine
Palestina
and
y
all of
todo el
Southwest
suroeste
Asia.
de Asia.
While panel
El
one focused
enfoque
on
es
the
crear
creation
las
of
condiciones
conditions
para
for
el diálogo,
dialogue,
la
peace,
paz y el
security,
desarrollo
and
del
development in
suroeste
Southwest
de
Asia,
Asia.
this
Este
panel,
panel
panel
va
two,
a
will
adentrarse
deal
más y
more
en
in
algunos
detail,
casos de
sometimes
manera
technical
técnica,
detail,
a los
with
proyectos
the
individuales y
individual
al
projects
concepto
and the
general del plan
overall
Oasis.
conception
Los
of the Oasis
panelistas
plan. The panel is
dieron el
accordingly
título La
titled
Fundación
The Physical Foundation for the
Física para el
Economic
Desarrollo del
Development of
Suroeste de
Southwest
Asia.
Asia.
Tengo el honor
Now, I have the
de
honor to
presentarles
introduce
a
to you a
varios
number of knowledgeable
expertos que
experts
van a
who will be
enfatizar y van a
making the
presentar
case for
que
the
el
economic and
desarrollo
social
económico no
reconstruction of not
solo
only
de esta zona
the
que ha
areas that
sido
have been completely
destruida
flattened and
por la
pulverized
guerra
by
de
Israel's
Israel
relentless
contra
warfare against the
Palestina,
Palestinian people.
pero
That is,
que
of
se
course,
puede
a
ir más
must.
allá para
But they
mostrar
will
una
go
manera
beyond to
de
show
crear
a
un
way to
nuevo
create an
suroeste de
entirely new
Asia,
Southwest Asia
construyendo el
by
desarrollo
building the basic
económico,
economic infrastructure,
empezando con
beginning
la
with
creación
large-scale
de
freshwater
proyectos
resources,
hidráulicos,
energy
infraestructura,
production,
como
transportation
la
systems,
base para
as a
crear
backbone
la
for building
agricultura
modern
moderna,
agriculture, manufacturing,
la
housing,
educación, los
healthcare,
servicios médicos,
education,
las
and all other relevant
instituciones que
facilities
necesitamos
that
para crear una
we
vida
need in a
digna.
modern and dignified
Así
life.
que nuestro panel
So our
consiste de
exciting and
Jason
excellent
Ross, que
panel
va a
consists
elaborar
of
sobre
Jason
el
Ross,
plan
who will
Oasis en
elaborate
gran
on the
detalle en
Oasis
un
plan in
momento,
greater
y
detail in
también
a
al señor
moment.
Ilya
Then
Andreev
we will have
de la
Mr. Ilya Andreev from the
misión
Russian
rusa a
mission to the
las
United Nations,
Naciones Unidas,
researcher
el
Dr.
doctor
Pierre
Pierre Berthelot
Berthelot,
y
nuclear
el doctor
physicist
Kelvin
Dr.
Kem,
Kelvin Kem.
que es un
We will have water
ingeniero
engineer William de
sobre el
Oreo,
agua,
and last but
y,
not least,
y el
Dr. Izzeldin
doctor
Abu El Aish,
Abulaish, que es
a
un
physician and
físico, es
author
un
from
doctor que ahora
Gaza,
vive en
who
Canadá.
now lives in
Y
Canada.
después
There will be
de
plenty of
esas
time after the
presentaciones
presentations
va
for
a haber un
discussions. More
grupo
experts
mayor
will
de
join us
expertos que
for
nos
the
van a acompañar
Q&A
en la segunda parte de
section
este
in
panel.
the second
Pueden
part of this
mandar sus
panel.
preguntas
You can send your
para que
questions to
se presenten
us. We will pick it up during the Q&A
al
session. The
correo
email
electrónico, que
address
es
would be the best way is
preguntas@schillerinstitute.org,
questions@schillerinstitute.org.
sin
No
guiones,
hyphens or
solo
dots, just
preguntas
just questions at schillerinstitute.org.
schillerinstitute.org.
Or if
Y
you
tenemos, y
now
también vamos
viewing the
a
live streaming on
ponerlo,
YouTube,
se
you can
puede
also
poner eso
post
en
them
el
in the
chat, y
chat. Or
también
if you're
puede
live on
usar
Zoom,
la
you
función
can
de
use the
chat
chat
que
functions there,
encontrará.
which you will find on the bottom of your window. So now, without further ado, let us begin with a presentation by Schiller Institute Science Advisor Jason Ross, who has taken a leading role in presenting the Oasis Plan, as it was originally conceived and refined approximately 5 decades ago under the guidance of the eminent physical economist, the late Lyndon LaRouche. So the floor is yours, Jason.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. I am very happy to be participating in this conference. I think that the discussion we had in the first panel was really tremendous. And I want to follow up on a few general thoughts before getting into some of the specifics about the physical economic development of the region and how an outlook that includes that transforms the potential for achieving peace, for achieving broader political victories. The few elements of the context that I want to emphasize are the global financial collapse afflicting the transatlantic world, where we're seeing high levels of inflation, a decay in industrial and other production, a growth of financial assets and of money printing at the same time that physical economic output is declining, something that Lyndon LaRouche laid out in a schematic in the 1990s. He called the triple curve. The second aspect is how this collapse intersects and really causes or provokes a push for a more generalized form of warfare. We see this in Ukraine, where the conflict between NATO and Russia that is playing out on that country's territory, largely, is something that could explode into a broader conflict. And we see it similarly in Southwest Asia, where Israel, not content to do what it's doing in Gaza, has seen fit to attack a Syrian diplomatic facility protected by the Vienna Convention in Damascus. What's the goal here? Is the attempt to create a broader war. The third aspect of the conflict that I want to mention briefly is the British role in setting it up. This was also discussed more fully in panel 1. But the British operation of divide and conquer, or of setting people against each other, these Brits have had a lot of experience in colonizing large portions of the world. And a significant aspect of their ability to succeed in doing that was to ensure that local groups were fighting each other rather than the British. I believe that plays out today, where there is plenty of hatred in Israel, in Palestine, and not only hatred, but it certainly does exist. And I think that we need to set our sights to the people setting up the game, where the people of the region are being used as if they were pawns to some degree. So we need a political resolution, we need peace, and we also need to talk more about what kind of outlook for the future will actually make that sort of peace possible. Putting everything together, the political discussions, the military discussions, the economic, the development discussions, and the last important piece of context I want to bring up in this is China's Belt and Road Initiative, and more broadly, the growing world role of the BRICS nations and of their institutions, like the new Development Bank, as one example. The fact that we are in an international climate where there are multiple sources of financing, not just the World Bank for projects like this, I think really transforms the potential of what can be accomplished. So let's begin with a top-down view of what it is to be a human being. I'd like to begin with a short quote. I'd like to begin with a short quote from Albert Einstein. It's very short. He says, "The eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility." What did he mean? In a certain sense, we are so used to the idea of human reason and of the fact that, unlike the animals, we have transformed our relationship to nature, that sometimes we forget to keep in mind what an amazing miracle it is that these thoughts that we possess in our minds have physical power over the world around us and let us transform our relationship to it. That's a very profound reflection. Let me read also a quote from Lyndon LaRouche. This is from 1995 in a paper he wrote entitled, "What is God that man is in his image?" LaRouche: "Each person is given the intellectual potential which no animal has, the power not only to imagine states of nature which have never before existed in the universe, but, under certain restrictions, to impose those ideas efficiently upon the universe generally. The condition to accomplish this is that imagination is brought into accord with universal lawfulness. It is creativity so defined which represents the individual person's intellect cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect. By this means," he wrote, "one is enabled to recognize, among one's own efficient forms of intellectual states, a quality which is a reflected image of God." LaRouche put this perspective into practice in composing the book There Are No Limits to Growth, which was a response to the Club of Rome's publication called The Limits to Growth. The Club of Rome had said that essentially no matter what we do, humanity was doomed, because we would either run out of resources, we would be overwhelmed by pollution, or we would be overcome by huge teeming masses of human beings with nowhere to live. The solution that the Club of Rome put forward was to reduce growth rates, reduce population, reduce living standards to sort of put off that inevitable calamity. LaRouche said, forget it, this is the wrong approach. The limits to growth are those that we impose upon ourselves. The limits that mankind faces are, in some sense, laws of nature, but also the limitations of our imperfect knowledge of those laws of nature. We create resources. Animals use resources, we use resources, we create resources. We're fundamentally different. And that conception between human beings and nature it's totally upside down in people's approach to ecology and related matters today. There is an axiomatic assumption that if we do it, it's wrong. That using our abilities to transform nature is somewhat of a sin, and that nature were better left alone without our intervention. Here is a short video clip from Lyndon LaRouche commenting on this outlook.
All people greenies must be.
We'll try that again.
We have to get rid of all these characters. All people greenies who say they're scientists must be expelled from the profession because they're committing a fraud. Any greenie who says he's a scientist is, by per se, committing a fraud by his mere existence.
Because we know that we have a basis of science that has to include human development.
Yeah.
So if you've excluded that or said that's an evil thing, then you can't be a scientist.
No, you're not. You're a faker.
Yeah.
If you believe in the green policy, you're a faker as a scientist.
Yeah.
Anybody who believes in the green policy is a faker if they claim to have scientific capabilities. If they want to say they're stupid, well, say, they're fine. Now you are stupid. That's true.
Well, they claim to say they're trying to maintain and continue existence in a universe which they deny has
it's all-
a principle of continued existence in it.
It's all just plain
Yeah.
gibberish.
Yeah.
There's no truth to it. They're idiots. Any professor, you say, oh, you mean you're Professor Idiot? You got a professorship in idiocy. We have to get rid of.
Green ideology actually is a hindrance in achieving the Oasis plan and the kind of development that it represents. And so that is something to keep into mind. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what makes the human species unique. We see here a couple of animals engaged in activities that you may have heard only human beings participate in. These animals are using tools. We've got some kind of ape using a stick to gather bugs of some kind to eat. We've got a sea otter cracking shells on its chest using a rock. Animals do use tools, but not the same kind that we use. The distinction of the human species is expressed very clearly by the Greek story of Prometheus, the fire bringer, whose story is told by Aeschylus in a trilogy of plays that he wrote, of which only the first now survives. In that first play, Aeschylus talks about how Prometheus brought fire from heaven and gave it to humanity, and what else Prometheus did in creating the human species distinct from the animals. Prometheus says, "Still, listen to the miseries that beset mankind, how they were witless before, and I made them have sense and endowed them with reason. I will not speak to upbraid mankind, but to set forth the friendly purpose that inspired my blessing. First of all, though they had eyes to see, they saw to no avail. They had ears, but they did not understand. But just as those shapes and dreams, throughout their length of days, without purpose, they wrought all things in confusion. They had no sign either of winter, or of flowery spring, or of fruitful summer, on which they could depend, but managed everything without judgment, until I taught them to discern the risings of the stars and their settings, which are difficult to distinguish. Yes, and numbers, too, chiefest of sciences, I invented for them, and the combining of letters, creative mother of the Muses' arts, with which to hold all things in memory. I, too, first brought brute beasts beneath the yoke, to be subject to the collar and the pack saddle." His view, Prometheus explains, is that through his gift of fire, through his gift of knowledge, he transformed what humanity was capable of. And I want to speak very briefly about the forms of fire that we have used. At first, humanity was distinguished from the animals simply by using basic wood fire. And this lets us do things. It lets us cook food, which makes it taste better and not kill us. It lets us do some working of materials, and it helps protect us from animals by scaring them away, as just a few examples. The most significant higher form of fire was the development of charcoal. Charcoal is made, or was made, by taking big piles of wood like the one that you see here, covering it with dirt, and then burning it without oxygen. What would result? Charcoal. What could you do with charcoal? You could burn it and it would make much less smoke than wood. It was more energy dense, and it was capable of providing enough heat and energy to enable us to enter the world of metallurgy. The rock on the right, the green rock, is a mineral called malachite. And on the left, you see a small lump of copper. That was made from another piece of that malachite. Charcoal allows us to use more of the periodic table to transform what we're able to do. By shifting from trees to using coal, we were able to unlock enormous amounts of power. Steam engines transformed manufacturing, making goods that had been available only to a few, available instead to the broader masses. And they transformed, coal allowed a transformation of our sense of distance and space and time by making it possible to power trains, which could cross vast distances and bring communities and people and goods and resources and intermediate goods closer to each other, totally changing what kind of production was possible in a region. The highest form of fire that we use today is electrical fire. It allows us to do things that we couldn't with the steam engine. You can power metalworking machinery with the steam engine, but you get a lot better effects sometimes if you're using a laser. I wanted to use the case study of China to point to this in the context of the gross lack of power in much of the world today. This is the Earth at night, and we can see areas that are dark, I don't think because of concern for preserving a pristine night sky, but from not having electricity in abundant supply. The highest form of fire is nuclear. On the left is a molecule of methane. Its combustion produces 8 units of energy. On the right is nuclear fusion, the combination of deuterium and tritium. This produces over 17 million units of energy. Over 1 million times more power. This is the power of the atomic nucleus. The concept that Lyndon LaRouche uses to put this together, he calls energy flux density. And this isn't the same thing as energy flux itself, which would be a flow of energy. LaRouche said that what is critical is not only the amount of energy, but its quality. And I illustrate this with 2 charts about China's development. This is the use of energy of all forms per person in China. The chart here goes from 1985 to 2022. An enormous increase, over 5 times increase during that time period. This is a chart specifically of electricity use per person in China. Electricity is a subset of energy. An even greater increase. Combining these, if we look at the amount of energy in China that is electrical, or electricity as a percentage of total energy use, we see that it's gone from about 5 or 6 up to 20%. The type of energy being used is of a higher nature. Now, this is critical in terms of what energy allows us to do, and we'll be hearing from other speakers about the implications for water that having powerful energy sources opens up for us. I want to also take a look at 2 examples of materials. So here we see the world production of fixed nitrogen in blue. The small magenta at the bottom is U.S. production. If we focus on world production, we, through our use of the energy-intensive Haber-Bosch process, are able to take nitrogen, which life needs and which makes up most of the atmosphere, and transform it into an organic form. We can do much better than the biosphere alone. Aluminum production has exploded over the past century. Why? Because it requires enormous amounts of electricity, and with it, we transform our relationship to materials. So I think we can take this under a general concept of infrastructure, and then now we'll turn to water and Southwest Asia in particular. This is a quotation from Lyndon LaRouche from 2010. He said, "Man, as a creator in the likeness of the great creator, is expressed by humanity's creation of the artificial environments we sometimes call infrastructure." And this infrastructure takes multiple forms. The infrastructure of transportation transforms our spatial relations. The infrastructure of an energy grid and of its availability and consistency totally changes what kind of productive processes you can engage in. It totally changes what kind of factory you can set up and expect to be able to generate an economic physical profit as a result of that. We also create artificial or synthetic environments in a social way. Are we creating an environment in which a peace is possible? Are we creating an environment in which higher levels of living standards capable of supporting a growing population in abundance is achieved? So let's turn to Southwest Asia now. Here you see a map of Israel and Palestine, and it's perhaps a little bit hard to see, but I urge you to look for the contours of the West Bank and of the Gaza Strip. This map is straight from Google Earth or an equivalent product, and it's not retouched. But if you take a look, I think you'll be able to notice that Gaza and the West Bank, compared with the Israeli-administered territories right next to them, don't look as green. And that's not your imagination. Water, and the shortage of water, is a tremendous force in this area. If we look at water consumption per person, we see an enormous disparity between Israelis, who individually have access to 247 liters of water per person. This statistically includes the West Bank settlers. And then we look at West Bank Palestinians, 82.4 liters. West Bank Palestinians that are not connected to the water grid, 26. This is far below the recommended minimum of the World Health Organization. How can you have a two-state solution if a state is not viable for lack of water? This is an elevation map of the area. The colors represent distance above, or in the case of the Dead Sea, below sea level. This was mentioned in the first panel, that the great depth of the Dead Sea area, the enormous negative elevation that it has, means that bringing water into it to recharge the shrinking Dead Sea would also be a great opportunity to make hydroelectricity from that enormous drop in elevation in the area. This is a map of rainfall, and I guess I should note that my use of this map does not mean I am recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel. This is just where the statistics are coming from. So you can see there's rain in the north, very, very little in the south. If we look at the level of natural so-called water available to people, we can see among countries in the region that Turkey, Iraq, Lebanon, the first three countries from the left, have what's considered to be sufficient water by global authorities. The next two in the middle, Syria and Egypt, are only about twice what's considered to be a critical level of water supply per person. If we really zoom in on the bottom, you can see Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority having below or even far below the level of water that is required. So what can be done? What can be done to make this region, which is starved of water, one that can become a land of abundance, a breadbasket? And how does it change the politics? So this is a map of the Jordan River Basin. The lighter areas that you see here, a river basin means what area of land, if rain fell there, would end up in a certain river. So this is the Jordan River Basin. And you can see to the east of the Sea of Galilee in the north, we can zoom in, the Yarmouk and other rivers in Syria. The worry that Israel would have is that these rivers would be dammed up, that the water would never reach the Sea of Galilee. that it could then not enter Israel's national water carrier, its water grid that takes water from the Sea of Galilee to supply Israel. So the Golan Heights issue, it's not only a political issue. This isn't just about altitude and missiles being launched from a certain area. This is also about water. How would the resolution of the Golan territorial dispute be eased if there wasn't such a tremendous risk, from Israel's point of view, of losing access to water without the Golan Heights? This is, in red, the national water carrier of Israel that I had mentioned. As you can see, the water is coming from up north, from the Sea of Galilee, and then it comes through canals, tunnels, and so forth, and you can see it splits into a couple of branches on the left part of this image. This is the water that allows, in large part, Israel's agricultural productivity. Also, Israel does a very good job of using using its water in a capitally intense way, of using drip irrigation and other technologies to get the most out of it. Israel has also been building building desalination plants. You can see the names of 5 of them on the left side of this image. All told, the level of desalinated seawater in Israel is enough to supply actually the great majority of drinking water in its cities. And this reduces the pressure then on the national water carrier on the Sea of Galilee, but it's insufficient to the task. On the top, you see the sources of water used in Israel. We have the dark blue natural water, rainwater, aquifers. We have TWW. And this chart, if you can't read, is from 1990 to 2020. TWW is treated wastewater. So gray water from, apartment buildings, hospitals, and so forth is treated and then used in agriculture. I don't think any of it's used for drinking directly at present. That's the treated wastewater. And then we see desalination already making up a quarter of water use for Israel. What if that number were higher? How would that change the water available to the other nations of the region? So people thinking about this have over decades, including, of course, Lyndon LaRouche with the Oasis plan from the 70s, looked at expanding water resources in the area. There's a few different charts here shown of ways to connect the Mediterranean either with the Dead Sea directly or further up along the Jordan River, which would have the same effect of increasing the flow into the Dead Sea. And we see on the bottom of the map a water conveyance from the Red Sea up through Jordan to the Dead Sea. I'll say a little bit more about these, and I know that we have an expert who will be able to say much more. This is a side view of one of the proposals to go straight from the Mediterranean on the west to the Dead Sea to the east, on the right of this image. This was prepared by a German proposal from decades ago. And if you can see at the bottom right, the water falls significantly down to the Dead Sea, and you could put in a hydro plant. This is a proposal for the route from the Red Sea up to the Dead Sea. So we're seeing in yellow, we're focusing on the Kingdom of Jordan. And if we follow this path, the orange path and then the blue path up, what we have is pumping water from the Sea of Aqaba, from the Red Sea. We pump it upwards, we desalinate it to provide water for new communities in the area. Desalination produces fresh water, and you have to do something with the salt. It doesn't create blocks of salt, what it creates is very salty water. So we're going to take that very salty water and we're going to keep it separate. We're not going to mix it back in. We can bring it to the Dead Sea, which won't mind the extra salt. The water continues, more desalination up towards the Dead Sea with water supply all the way up to Amman, Jordan, a city that really has significant water shortages. And as the brine and additional water heads into the Dead Sea, you get to make some electricity. The amount of energy required to essentially double the Jordan River flow and dramatically increase water availability for the people of this region is actually not that large. And I believe we'll be hearing later in this panel more specifics about that. I do want to just say one word about what the Oasis plan is not. You see here in blue a proposal, one of the proposals for what was called the Ben Gurion Canal. And this was to be a navigable waterway from the Mediterranean down to the Red Sea. In other words, this would be an alternative to the Suez Canal. This isn't what we're proposing. The Suez Canal has plenty of capacity. What we're talking about is water. So putting all of this together, along with projected rail lines, other transportation connections, and if we think about the broader region, in a Belt and Road Initiative kind of framework, we see an area of the world that is a natural hub of connectivity. This is where continents come together. Europe, Asia, Africa. This is a fantastic location with sufficient water, with peaceful development, with transportation. This is an area that would truly be flourishing. The last thing I want to say, and I'm grateful for your forbearance and listening to me so long, is a little bit more about the Treaty of Westphalia. This, just to give some sense of it, is an image of some of the battles in the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. This is a map of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. Very complex political situation. I mean, you thought you've seen difficult borders? Take a look at these. Discontinuous, a mess, right? A lot of difficulty. This is a map that shows the decline in population in areas of what's today Germany. The dark red, more than 2/3 of the population gone. The orange, more than 1/3 of the population gone. 8 million people killed in the course of this war. Protestants versus Catholics, in large part, is how it was framed. What was done? How did this fighting end? Well, the Treaty of Westphalia took an approach that was future-oriented, and I want to read a couple of quotes from that treaty to finish off this presentation, as I think that they are relevant to our needs today. Article 1 of the Treaty of Westphalia. I'll read the bold part. This peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. Each side should act for the advantage of the other. Benevolence. Article 2. On both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the troubles, no matter how or where, from one side or the other, happened in terms of hostility. Instead, the fact that each and every one, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard of persons or incomes, should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one might demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity. A future orientation. I close with a short quote from Lyndon LaRouche. This is from 1979. He said, "The only human thing is to give the lives and suffering of the dead meaning, not merely by establishing peace in the Middle East, but by establishing the basis for peace, which gives fulfillment to the lives of the present and future generations of Palestinian and other Arabs, and thus purpose and fulfillment to the sacred lives of the dead." This, of course, applies to the Israelis as well. Ask yourself, how does a future-oriented policy in which the shortage of water is addressed from an international perspective of regional and global development, how does this transform the political terrain? What kind of peace can be achieved?
Thank you so much, Jason, for focusing our minds on some of the basic principles that actually govern economics, which is creativity. We can create resources, etc. So if you've just tuned in, you're watching panel 2 of the Schiller Institute online conference, April the 13th, 2024, on the Oasis plan, the LaRouche solution for peace through development between Israel, Palestine, and the Southwest Asian region. Next, we will continue with a speech by Mr. Ilya Andreev. He is the first secretary and an expert on humanitarian affairs of the Russian Federation mission to the United Nations. We're looking forward to your remarks.
Good afternoon, colleagues. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude to the organizers of today's conference for the opportunity to speak and to share our views on the situation in the Gaza Strip, in general, on the prospects for the development of Southwest Asia. Unfortunately, we are witnessing a catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, where, contrary to UN Security Council Resolution 2728, which demands an immediate ceasefire, the ruthless military operation of Israel continues. Two previously adopted UN Security Council resolution on the issue of humanitarian access are also not working. Israel is still creating obstacles for humanitarian workers on the ground who are deprived of adequate and safe conditions. The shelling continues, killing civilians, medical and humanitarian personnel, as well as volunteers who have assumed their duty to help those in need in this difficult situation. One of the latest examples is the attack on the organization World Central Kitchen. Unfortunately, this is not a single case. This particular incident was widely publicized due to the fact that the citizens of Western countries were killed. In the current circumstances, it is of course important and necessary to talk about the restoration of Palestine and change the development paradigm of the entire region, although this is not the most important task right now. The main thing today is an urgent and real ceasefire. This is the only way to prevent the apocalypse, after which there may be nothing left to restore. It must be borne in mind that the Palestine collapse will inevitably engulf the entire region if the parties fail to reach peace agreement in the near future. Dear participants, on the eve of the conference, the organizers published a fragment of an interview with the founder of the International Schiller Institute, Ms. Helga Zepp LaRouche, as food for thoughts. We support the main message, which involves the implementation of the large-scale Oasis plan to supply the region with water, including for irrigation needs. It is precisely such a large international infrastructure project that could serve as an incentive for the economics of Palestine, Yemen, Syria, and other countries. Its launch would definitely have a positive impact on providing young people with jobs, including qualified ones, on creating conditions for the return of refugees, and on the economic stability of the entire region. This is certainly a very attractive idea. Yes, it is obvious that its implementation depends on the not only on the political will of states, but also on significant investments. According to the various expert estimates, Israel has already spent more than $100 billion on the war in Gaza. And this is not counting the humanitarian aid that the international community is sending or trying to send to the region to deal with the consequences. I leave out the arguments about the price of human lives. It cannot be measured at all. Just imagine that these funds could be used for peaceful purposes, which in theory should be in the interest of Israel as well. Perhaps these resources would not have been enough to implement such a large-scale project, which Ms. LaRouche told us about, but the base for it would be definitely created. We could already see the multiplier effect in the economy, and growth incentives would definitely appear. There are also estimations by the World Bank and the United Nations Development Program that the reconstruction of Gaza needs around 18 billion US dollars as of today. UNCTAD is also working on the assessments. However, even the groundwater aquifer in Gaza are now damaged. Therefore, at this stage, it is difficult to calculate how much time and money it will take to improve such a complex environmental situation in Gaza. We continue to believe that the economic development of states based on open trade is a fundamental basis of stability. The fight against poverty, which is so often talked in the UN system, is also Sorry, do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I will continue. So, on the principle of economic development, it is impossible to ensure the elimination of hunger if you offer only ready-to-eat food. You need to provide those in need with fishing rod. States should pay more attention to infrastructure projects, including international ones. Such cooperation based on the principle of mutual respect actually creates those very strong industry ties and common ground that allow people to live in peace and harmony. Dear ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, today is not the best time to talk about the long-term prospects for an Israeli-Palestinian settlement. As I said, the primary task at the moment is to ensure that the swords of iron are sheathed again as soon as possible. Of course, this doesn't stop us from thinking about new approaches to the long-term resolution of one of the most complex and confusing conflicts of our time. We are glad that such work is underway, including under the auspices of the Schiller Institute, and we are confident that it will be in demand after the start of the so far delayed but still inevitable fundamental transformations that will increasingly change both Palestinian and Israeli societies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andreev. Thanks for making clear that there's an absolute urgency of humanitarian aid and a ceasefire, but also thank you for your support for the idea of mutual cooperation as a means to actually achieve a longer lasting peace. Next, we will have Dr. Pierre Berthelot. He is an associate researcher at the IPSE, which is an Institute for Security Affairs in Europe, and founded in 1988, that brings together a community of researchers. He's also a member of the Académie de l'eau, excuse my French, and director of the journal Orients Stratégiques. Yeah, you have the floor. Please, we are happy to listen to your remarks.
Thank you, first of all, for your invitation, kind invitation to this international conference. I'm very honored and delighted to make some few comments on the current situation. Well, sorry, I have no documents to present here tonight because the huge majority of my works are in French, unfortunately. Never mind. So my topic tonight is very clear. The subject is water in Middle East is the possibility to accede to peace, or on the other hand, it is maybe more an impediment, an obstacle to the peace. First of all, if we look at history, we should be pessimistic. Why? Let's say that water usually is more a bone of contention between countries. Why? Because you know that we are in an area in Middle East where water is scarce, and with climate change, it's going worse and worse. So water is declining in this special area. This is the first reason. The second one is that when you look during the last 60 or 70 years, water at many times was a subject of conflict, not always war, sometimes, but at very, very more time, a bone of contentions. I will take a few examples. For instance, when Turkey decided in the 1980s to build more and more dams in the southeast of Turkey. Why? Because they wanted to increase the production of wheat, etc., and they wanted also to fight the uprisal, the upheaval of the Kurd Turkish Kurds, and so it was a big problem for the neighbors, especially for Syria. So this is an example, and the two countries were close to war in the let's say around 2000. Okay, another example with Israel and its neighbors, as it was very clear in the first presentation tonight, which was excellent, with maps. We saw that Israel wanted to also to develop its agriculture, and also to have more water for its population, as it was increasing and increasing. The Jewish population in Israel, majority came, as you know, either from Europe or from Arab countries. So they need more water, and it was one of contentions with the neighbors, as unfortunately the Eisenhower proposal, the Johnston plan in the 1950s, was not followed. So again, it was, some historians say, one of the main reasons of the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War was during just a couple of months before it occurred. There was in harsh tensions between Syria and Israel regarding the water resources. So when you have all these explanations, so one must be maybe quite pessimistic. But on the other hand, even if today it seems quite difficult, I want to be optimistic. I want to be positive. Why? Because the situation in some way changed. What changed? First of all, now Israel has enough water because Israel is one of the leading countries in desalination water. You know, there are many plants. It was shown by the first presentation with very good maps. So now Israel can even sell water to Jordan. So this is the first thing. the desalination revolution occur in Middle East, not only Israel, but also in United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. So this is a very important point. And so, in my opinion, when today Israel say, for instance, we can't create an independent Palestinian state. Why? Because one of the threats for us is that if the future Palestinian states manage its own water without Israeli control, which is the current situation now, we are fear that we will lack water. The two countries are very mixed in the management of the water sources. That you know that there are aquifer waters and there the West Bank, for instance. So this is one argument of Israel, but I think this argument is no longer available. Is no longer pertinent, as I say now, Israel has, in my opinion, enough water. Even if climate change threat is coming higher and higher, and so there is this agreement with Jordan. For this, the first thing why I'm quite optimistic regarding the future of this. Another example, just recently, an agreement occurred between Lebanon and Israel. It was not directly on the water situation. It was on energy, and especially regarding the border, in the sea border between Lebanon and Israel. And so what is very interesting is that the major political Lebanese political party, the Hezbollah, which is quite close to Iran, as everybody knows. The Hezbollah some years ago said never Lebanon can go with an agreement with Israel. It's not possible. It is our fierce enemy. Okay, this is still the official discourse. But never mind, what is very interesting that Hezbollah didn't do anything to pose some problems for the Lebanese government not to reach this agreement. So it didn't support it officially, but it didn't oppose it. This is very interesting. So it shows that even when you have the fierce enemy in the area, they can reach peace or a kind of agreement. That's why I'm quite optimistic. I think even if now it seems impossible because we see the situation in Gaza every day, which is so terrible. So if you say, oh, maybe in 5 years or in 10 years, we will have peace between Palestinian and Israeli, someone would say you're crazy. It's impossible. But I'm still optimistic because I just give you an example that shows that even the worst enemy can reach agreements. And maybe in the Palestinian case, of course, in 5 years, in 2 years, in 10 years, there will be maybe, I think, an agreement which is possible based on economic exchanges and maybe water trade between Israel and Palestinians. Of course, for instance, Hamas will oppose it, but maybe he won't do all his efforts to break the agreement. Officially, we say, well, yes, we are not for this agreement, but maybe if in some years we have a new Palestinian president, for instance, maybe he can get an agreement with Israel regarding the situation of water. I mean, it's not impossible if we have this example of Lebanon and Israel, which are officially still, I would say, in war. There is no peace treaty between Israel and Lebanon, but with the American mediation, which is very interesting to quote, they reached this agreement on the sea water border because, as you know, there is a potential of energy of oil or gas offshore, offshore oil and offshore gas, just at very close from Lebanon. And Israel, as you know, is for many years now exploiting and this oil and this gas resources, which is very interesting regarding our topic tonight, and especially the Lyndon-LaRouche plan, or Oasis plan, because we need, of course, we need some energy if we want to this desalination plant to work. So one way is, of course, oil and gas. Another way is the sun, the solar energy. And of course, the nuclear energy is also a possibility. And as you know, there is some countries in the Middle East that are now engaged in civilian nuclear energy, like United Arab Emirates, for instance. And it was a project of former Colonel Gaddafi. Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, he wanted to have nuclear energy, not military nuclear energy, but civilian. Why? To do exactly what LaRouche proposed in the 70s. I mean, to use this nuclear energy to promote desalination water plants, which is a very interesting idea. So I will now just to finish and to say that we have this possibility of peace, and water can be a way to bring peace because some experts say that water knows boundaries. Water knows no boundaries. I mean, water is flowing and crossing many countries. So it's in the interest of all this neighbor in Middle East to go to peace. And it was also the spirit of the New York agreements in 1997. It was a project of the United Nations, of the International Commission of Law, to put some rules regarding the sharing of international rivers. And one of the rules is that you can't take water from international rivers without informing your neighbor, because it's a common resources. And this is a very interesting point. In the past, there was also many projects to promote peace through water. There was a Turkish plan in the 1990s, even between Israel and Turkey, but at the last moment, it didn't succeed. There was also the plan of the Sadat president of Egypt, because when he made peace with Israel, following the Camp David agreement in 1979, of course, many Arab countries, Muslim countries, and even some Egyptians were quite reluctant to this agreement between Egypt and Israel. They say it was a kind of betrayal. And so that's why at that moment, the Sadat president proposed to bring some water, fresh water from Egypt, from the Nile, of course, to Israel, especially to Jerusalem, because they say it's a holy city, not only for Jews, not only for Christians, but also for Muslims. And so we will bring water to Jerusalem, and the Palestinians will benefit from this water. So the idea was to promote peace through water. Unfortunately, again, this project didn't succeed because, as you know, President Sadat was murdered, was killed by extremists. But never mind, in Middle East, you have always this idea that, of course, water can lead to the war, as it is quite scarce. But in the same time, water can be a possibility to bring peace, because everybody needs water. And you have the case of international waters, international aquifers, international rivers. So the main possibility to reach to a global peace, it's involve all the countries in a global plan. That's what the spirit of the Johnston plan at Eisenhower's era. And I think we have to work, the international community, on this possibility, because as former President Shimon Peres from Israel said, if we want peace, water won't be a problem. Okay, in his opinion, there is either enough water in some areas, and when you don't have enough water, you can imagine new solutions to have more water. And that's why, and it is on this project, Israel worked and succeeded in the desalination water, and other countries in Middle East. So now we know that we have the technology. We can strengthen this technology, of course, with new energy sources and maybe nuclear energy, civilian nuclear energy. And so that's why I'm still optimistic, maybe not in the coming years, maybe in 5 years, 10 years, but there are many technical possibilities now to go to peace with water. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berthelot. I think you're completely right. Water is a treasure of humanity. It can be an issue of contention and war, but also of sharing. You mentioned energy and gave me a very good transition to the next speaker, who is an expert on nuclear energy and will also talk about nuclear desalination, I guess. Dr. Kelvin Kem, a business strategy consultant based in Pretoria, South Africa. A nuclear physicist, former chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. And Dr. Kem, I will give you the floor.
You're muted, Dr. Kem.
Sorry about that. Over many centuries, if there's one subject that has transcended political conflict, it's been science. Scientists have continued to talk to each other during times of conflict. That is terribly important. We also have to look at something else now, and that is that there's a direct correlation between the GDP of a country and its electricity consumption. There's a rather well-known graph in economics that shows an absolute direct correlation. There's a straight line. No countries do not fall on this line or near to the line. If you want to double the income of a person, you have to double the electricity consumption of the country. End of story. Nobody makes money without electricity. It is the lifeblood of a country. It's the lifeblood that keeps everything going. Just as much as if your heart stops beating, your body immediately starts to stop, and your liver and your stomach and your everything doesn't work. If electricity stops in a country, the country winds down. The technology itself is changing mankind. Not only are we getting new devices coming about, food mixers and microwave ovens and so on, but what is happening is that more and more people are getting individual influence through things such as Facebook, email, the internet, and so on. So individuals that only a few years ago were hidden in the background can now become prominent around the world by getting onto the internet and so on. But this is going even further now. For example, Elon Musk has been launching thousands of Starlink satellites. The Starlink satellites will enable people to directly communicate into the internet without going through a local service provider, which means that you are not constrained by the politics of your own country unless they start to block the transmission, which can happen. So what's happening is more and more people are getting more and more individual influence. There's a good side to that. But unfortunately, often when you get a good side to something, you also get a bad side to it. Because without doubt, society needs social cohesion and social discipline. You get teenagers walking around with T-shirts with no rules written on them. And it looks very good to say, I just do my own thing. I don't conform to society's rules. It feels good as a youngster to have that opinion. But unfortunately, that's not how society works. We heard Helga say earlier that the extreme left in Germany is becoming so dictatorial. So what's happening is that some of these left-wing elements are saying their version of society, which apparently is this free version of society, no rules and so on, they determine that that is the best for society. But then what happens is they come along and say, now you will do as we say. You will run your life as we say. And the so-called no rules turns into their rules imposed on everybody else. That is very worrying. That infringes the freedom of others that don't want to be part of it. And to my mind, this is a force in the world at the moment which is terribly worrying. And I think that some of the Lyndon LaRouche comments that we saw earlier apply directly to this. Then they come along and they say their plan for living is to live simply, not individuals becoming powerful through capitalism and so on. Everybody's supposed to be this equal, simple life. But you can't run society with solar panels on everybody's roof. You cannot run an electric train hundreds of kilometers on solar panels. It's all well and good having a solar panel that helps you with your electricity in your house to maybe cut your bills. But solar panels and wind are not going to run countries. You can't force people into this so-called simple life. So what happens is that this left-wing element wants to have this no rules type of society, but on the assumption that everything continues to work. The roads will work, the railway lines will work, telephone communications will work, TV will still work, this and that and that and that will all still work, but there will be no rules. That unfortunately is not how it works. Now, if you look at two of the critical things that we've been talking about, electricity and water. Now, electricity and water in our modern world have come to be effectively basic human rights, so to speak. Now, it can't be a right in the sense that somebody's got to pay for it, but electricity and water have become critical. What we also have to take note of now, if we look at water, the total amount of water on the planet is fixed. No water is being used up and no water is being added to in terms of the number of molecules on the planet. What's happening is we move them around. Mother Nature is not going to double the rainfall on the planet. Rainfall is water that evaporates, goes up into the air, forms clouds, clouds move somewhere, and then it comes down again. But when you look at societies growing now, not only is the population of the planet increasing a lot, but more and more people are expecting to have electricity and water running to their houses and so on. So we've got to appreciate that we need big increases. If you look at electricity, for example, the world's consumption of electricity doubled over the last 25 years. There's absolutely no reason to assume that it won't double over the next 25 years. In fact, I think it will go much quicker. I think it will double within 20 years or earlier because of the number of electrical devices that are coming about and the fact that many more people are becoming electrified. It's well known that in Africa, there's still something like 600 million people or so that don't have access to electricity. And they're wanting electricity. So what we have to look at is an increase in electricity consumption of 100%. When that's happened, there'll be another 100% and then another 100%. These fanciful ideas that you'll have solar panels on your roof and somehow everything will stabilize in the interest of supposedly saving the planet and we won't have any more industrialization and so on, is just plain and simply nonsense. We need to double the quantity of electricity being consumed and therefore we need to double the production of electricity. The same goes for water. The water consumption of the planet is going to double and then it's going to double again. But Mother Nature is not going to produce any more water. So water becomes an electricity issue or an energy issue. We're going to have to move the water around a lot more. So we need much more desalination. We need much more pumping, canals, and all sorts of scientific methods of shifting this water around. We heard the previous speaker now speak very eloquently about the situation of the water distribution in that Middle East region. Some have got more than others and so on. What we've got to do is take more water out of the ocean, desalinate it, get it onto the land and shift it around and recycle it. So this becomes a technological issue. And referring back to where I started, science and technology has always tended to transcend political conflicts. And we need that. When we look at conflicts in the world and the number of people dying, it is so sad that the people who are dying are not the people who started the conflict in the first place. They're the cannon fodder that are going in there. Young men and women and children when the fighting breaks out. So we need to have much more of a society in which there are rules and which there is structure. We cannot allow this extreme green left wing to come along and do as much damage as they are. We've got to look towards doubling the electricity consumption, doubling the water consumption. And that means things like desalination on a large scale. I think it's also very important, therefore, for there to be a lot of technological cooperation between countries. If we're going to do these big water schemes, it can't be just within the political borders of a country. You've got to be able to look at moving water from the ocean through a desalination system far away from where it originated. Now, we in South Africa have been looking at these challenges. We developed here in Pretoria a small modular nuclear reactor. In fact, South Africa was the first country in the world to start developing a commercial small modular reactor. We have one now ready to build that produces 100 megawatts of heat or 35 megawatts of electricity. What's happening now is the psychology of how the energy can be used changes. The small modular reactors can be owned by a state, a municipality, individual companies like a mining company, agricultural groupings. It's no longer necessary for electricity to be controlled by the country. It's not necessary to have a national grid. With a small modular reactor, you can put it wherever you like in Africa. You can go far away from the current transmission lines, put a nuclear reactor there and have a 2 or 3 kilometer diameter grid, completely independent of the national grid. So we have to look at a completely different way of supplying this energy. And similarly with things like moving water around, desalinating the water, pumping at very long distances. That is all technologically feasible. Here in South Africa, every year there's a bit of a gamble that happens, like playing roulette at the casino, as to whether or not we're going to have a good maize crop. If the rains happen to come at the right time, at the right amount of water spread over the right number of days, we get a bumper maize crop and we export maize around the world and make a lot of money. The next year, we find we don't get the water at the right time. Then there's a maize shortage and we're importing it. And that's all because of the rain. If we could pump the water in there and guarantee the water supply every year, there'd be a bumper maize crop every year and produce much more maize to feed many more people. Here, we have pipelines that pump petrol and diesel from the coast up to where I live in Pretoria. And initially, when this was proposed years ago, it was quite astounding because the distance is 600 kilometers. and they put petrol into the pipeline, start pumping the petrol in. Believe it or not, they put a spacer in the pipeline, and this metal thing travels along, and then immediately behind it they put diesel, and then immediately behind another spacer they put a different grade of petrol, and the petrol and the diesel all travels through the 600-kilometer pipeline and comes out in the Johannesburg-Pretoria end. If we can do that over 600 kilometers, pumping petrol and diesel in the same pipeline, there's no reason why one can't pump water over very long distances from a point of desalination to where the water is required. These need an attitude of how we get technological cooperation and how we get things like our small modular reactors deployed over wide areas. There, what you also have, and I could go on for hours, but I can't do that. Across Africa, for example, we could put small modular reactors effectively in every country. But to have a nuclear reactor, you require International Atomic Energy Agency collaboration. You require a national nuclear regulator. South Africa has one of the oldest national nuclear regulators in the world. We're 40 years old now. And but you can't expect every country to develop a sophisticated nuclear regulator to be able to own a nuclear reactor. So what we've been looking at is connecting all these reactors together, so to speak, via the internet, that from one central control point, you can see the pressures in a whole lot of reactors in different countries. You can watch the flow rates. You can do a lot of things and have a whole collaborative affair that if something goes wrong and you need a rapid response, regulators can get onto an aircraft. The aircraft can fly there rapidly with Geiger counters and so on to check. Now, all of that technological cooperation is required to ensure that people have a good lifestyle. Because, as I said earlier, GDP growth is directly linked to electricity, which is technology. So we need somehow to transcend just this political bickering that goes on over borders and so on, and try and get a higher intellect that is going to look at how we deploy modern technology in a macro scale, in a much more collaborative way all over, bearing in mind that individual people now are getting more power, like being able to connect directly to the internet through the Starlink satellites and so on. So more and more individuals are getting power that they didn't have a few decades ago. The danger there is that more of these individuals, if they're on the extreme left-wing side, are starting to go for this radical green thing where they start to put fantasy plans into place which are not going to work. We need to get the realistic people to be able to create these frameworks that we can, through technology, do the best for mankind. And I think it's all possible, but it's an intellectual challenge, and it's quite a challenge all around. But I'm sure it's possible to solve this with the right attitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kem. It's really good to hear a voice of common sense. I'm sitting of course, in the anti-nuclear insanity epicenter in Berlin, Germany. So our next speaker is also a water expert, William D'Orio, an American expert on water engineering projects. He's the president of Aquacraft Water Management based in Colorado, and he also has experiences in water planning projects in the Southwest Asian region, if I'm not mistaken, for over 12 years in Jordan. Hello. The floor is yours. I think you have to unmute yourself. I cannot hear you. Still no voice. Have you muted yourself?
He's unmuted, but
try again. Oh yeah, now we can hear you. Oh no, I can hear something. That was our technical staff. I don't know. Maybe you, Dave. What should we do? We can maybe play the video of the last speaker, and then
let's do that. Yes.
Okay, we'll get back to you, Mr. Oreo, once you have worked out the technical difficulties. We will next play a video by Dr. Izzeldine Abu El Aish. It's a pre-recorded video. Dr. Abu El Aish is a physician, a professor, author, peace activist, originally from Gaza, who now lives in Canada. Tragically, he has lost 3 of his children and a niece. They were killed by an Israeli tank shell in a war in 2009. But Dr. Abu El Aish has resolved I Will Not Hate, a conviction that became the title of his book, published a year later, and now also a film. He was nominated 5 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. The video excerpt that you're about to see is part of an hour-long interview that Michel Rasmussen in Copenhagen, representative of the Schiller Institute, did with Dr. Abu El Aish. And you will see that the video starts with the doctor himself, and I was asked to read the question that Ms. Rasmussen has asked. And the question was the following: what is the importance of the peace through economic development idea and the Oasis plan, a future vision of cooperation between a free Palestine and Israel for economic development of the whole area, and how that could be an important way of making a path to peace?
Peace is a dynamic state. It's not a static. And peace is a relationship between and within. And this relationship can be social, environmental, educational, political, and cultural and social relationships. So we need the needs for it. Peace transcends what we call conflict and violence. And that's the negative peace, what we call it negative peace, absence of war and conflict. But we need the human and positive peace, which is related and interconnected with many other disciplines and many other sectors. And the foundation for peace relationship, of course, is to have a negative peace, to have the negative peace where there is no absence of war and conflict, which leads to stability and sustainability of developing other relationships in relation to education, social, environmental, and part of it is economic development. Economic development is highly needed, but you need the foundation. The core essence of peace is to have absence of war and conflict that leads to economic development, social relationships to develop between the people based on equality, justice, freedom, respect, compassion, and dignity of all. And that's what we need to work on it in a comprehensive, holistic approach, not in a fragmented way, because there is an interplay between these different sectors, the economic, the social, the political, the environment. You see it in this situation. What do we do? Do we have peace with our environment or not? We are doing damage to our environment, as you see it with the environmental change, the climate change, and what is happening in our world with the earth on which we live. So we need to learn the lessons that peace is a relationship that based on collaboration, partnership, and sharing together for one interest that leads to stability and sustainability. And most important, that this peace should be dynamic to match the needs, the updates, because life is not static, it's a changing. So need this peace to work on it. And I say about it, peace is a journey. And within this journey, we need to be flexible to match with the journey, with what are the needs. Because peace, health, democracy, freedom, development, equality, justice, life, and education depend on who you are and where you are. If you are a man, if you are a woman, if you are a child, if you are old, if you are Palestinian, if you are Danish, if from this world. So we need to create something in common between the people to believe in it and to match their needs and to act based on the needs. So I believe economic development is essential once we have the negative peace, the end of war and conflict, and to start to fill the gap in equity and to achieve equality, freedom, justice, and dignity, and of course, most important, respect for all. So the first step, the priority for this, now we need to end this continuing, ongoing genocide. So we need to stop the bloodshed, to have immediate, permanent ceasefire and end of the war. Number two, we need to start serious negotiations to say this is the last to happen as a bloodshed and war. We need to put an end to it, based, as I said, based on the international resolutions, because I say, where are we from the Human Rights Conventions? Where are we from the Geneva Convention? Where are we from the United Nations resolutions? We want to revive hope in these institutions, because the world lost its faith, and the public, the people, they lost its faith in these institutions. We need to resume trust in the international resolutions and the international institutions. We live in a discordant world, mostly controlled by political agenda to serve the political agenda of the political leaders who are sitting there to control, to dominate, and they are completely disconnected from the public's needs. So we need this, number one, to put an end to this genocide and to start serious negotiations based on the international resolutions to put an end to the occupation, to the atrocities, and most important, accountability, because we need accountability in our world. Anyone who is violating, because when we speak about violence, violence happens when we violate someone's dignity, rights, freedom, and of course, life. So we need to have accountability, and parallel with that, to start the issue of economic development, which will be consistent with the stability and sustainability. Believe me, this will spread hope among the people to see a change in their life. And that's the key for success of economic development, based on ending the violence and the conflict, the occupation, and the injustices. My message to the people who started to be aware, because what is happening in Gaza Strip, in the Palestinian territories, it's a genocide as you described it. It's a mass slaughtering, mass killing, mass displacement, mass destruction. All of these atrocities that the Palestinians are facing under the observation of the international community. It's exposed and it's unfolding on daily basis. You are well-known, respected journalists, many journalists, more than 100 journalists were killed. Children are killed. Parents, they lost their parents, their families. 17,000 orphans, more than 34,000 Palestinians, innocent Palestinians were killed. When you see it, most of them, about 14,000 are children, about 10,000 are women. Why? Women are the future, and the children are the future and the life. They are killing the life. So what I call it, it's a futile side, killing the future. So we need to stop it. So I appeal to the world, please zoom in, take action, not to watch what is happening. It's impacting all of us by watching what is happening. It's painful. It's a terrible situation and horrific and heartbreaking. I feel jaundiced when yesterday was the Eid for the Palestinians and the Muslims. Many of the Palestinians, I have been watching videos, they said, what kind of Eid? All of those we loved and we were seeing them, my brothers, sisters, families, all of them, they are gone. And even the other day, you will be surprised, my brother, he went to visit the graves of my daughters that you are talking about. And even the graves of my daughters, they were demolished. The stones, they were demolished. Even the dead, there is no mercy for the dead. So what can we do? I urge the international community, which is afflicted by what is happening, because what is happening in Palestine across barriers, the world is divided now between the political leaders and the public, but the public is standing, and I am sure one day it's time, the public will say it's time to humanize, to equalize, to stabilize, and to take action. And political leaders, we need to put pressure on the political leaders who are biased, complicit, and indifferent, or even selective to serve their own agenda. It's time to stop them and to be accountable to their acts and to be kicked out of their offices. This will be the guarantee. The future is the people's future, not the political leaders' future.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Abu El-Aish. You are absolutely right. We must put much more pressure on indifferent politicians, especially also here in Germany, which is also a complicit country. So have we overcome the obstacles of the technical difficulties? Hello. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, I've introduced you already. So, William De Orio, take it away. Floor is yours.
So can you enable screen sharing?
Yeah, you can do it.
Not me, but somebody can.
Okay, it says host has disabled screen sharing.
Try it now.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
Hang on a second. Hang on, everybody. All right. So, can you see my screen there?
We can. Yep.
Okay, that's a good sign. That we're making progress. All right. So, I just having listened to the presentation from 9 o'clock this morning our time till now, I'm just struck by the notion of a group of people watching a burning building, and people saying, "Well, let's put some water on this building. Let's start the fire hoses." And one group is saying, "Well, maybe we gotta find the people who started the fire, make them put the water on the building." But I think from our perspective, as scientists and engineers, we're more interested in having getting the fire put out first. And we can deal with the other things later. And I'm firmly of the belief that an economic solution, technical and economic solution, can be the basis of a political solution, where it's often very difficult to come to a political solution because the degree of passion and injury is so immense. That it makes it very, very difficult. But we can start small. And so one of the things that in 2015, our company did a water study for the Kingdom of Jordan. And during that study, I got into conflict with the agency that was sponsoring it because they were trying to find out ways that they expected us to find ways to keep the people from getting the water that they needed in order to limiting the demand to what the supply was. And I kept arguing, no. What we really need to do is we need to increase the supply to provide Jordan with the water that they need in order to have an advanced society. You cannot enforce people into a permanent state of deficit, right? Shortages. It just doesn't work. So one of the technical solutions that I have been long in favor of is a type of nuclear reactor that runs on the thorium fuel cycle. It is cooled by molten salt, not water. It operates at very high temperature, and with these reactors, you can generate electricity and use the waste heat from the reactor to desalinate water. And so the problem, this problem in the 1960s, other speakers have alluded to this, that the idea that Johnson planted during the 60s, the United States came very close to really making a breakthrough in nuclear technologies in the 60s at a place called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, under the direction of Dr. Alvin Weinberg, who developed a technology for using thorium to generate electricity. And without getting into all the details, thorium is a technology that is inherently a safer and less militaristically embedded technology. It does not create the same kind of problems with proliferation. It does not even require enrichment of uranium. It's fundamentally a different kind of technology. But because it was so different, and because it did not generate fuel for bombs, the system was scrapped by the nuclear energy, the Department of Defense, in favor of technologies that generated plutonium. So that the nuclear technology, the nuclear development was basically hijacked in the 60s. And Dr. Weinberg, the statement, I will just read this one little statement. The first nuclear era is over. Let us plan for a second nuclear era based on a new and more rational technology. And this was written in 1973. And what they were meaning by that was that the technology that we had developed was basically a weapons technology with a little bit of civilian goodies attached to it. And what we need is to rethink the way we do this and to build an inherently peaceful nuclear technology. Now, in the Middle East, in Jordan, I don't know if you remember the Syrian, it seems like so long ago, but the Syrian revolt that happened in Dara, Syria. Do you remember that? That revolt that began the entire, it was like the attempt to overthrow the regime of the government of Syria, the Assad government. But that began with a group of farmers that lost their irrigation rights, okay? Their wells were shut down. They moved, so they were forced from being productive and fairly and self-sufficient farmers and agriculture people into living in Dara as poverty-stricken street people. They began, the children went out and started writing graffiti on the walls complaining about their situation. And remember, these kids were arrested. There were some, I think a couple of them were killed. And it began the entire revolt. And it all came down to they had lost their water and they lost their ability to be self-sufficient. Now, in this map of Jordan, the reason that of course, I've worked in Jordan, I'm familiar with Jordan. There's several advantages that Jordan has in solving the Middle East problem. One, it has access to the Red Sea here at Aqaba. And what we had proposed, and there's been discussion about the Red Dead project, which is basically build large canals and using gravity to flow water into the Dead Sea and then to generate electricity. That is, my understanding, has reached kind of an impasse because of problems with the amount of water going into the Red Sea and effects that would have on the ecology of the Red Sea. But what we were taught, what our concept was that you would bring, there are companies that will make nuclear reactors on barges. One is a company called Thorcon, and there's Copenhagen Atomics, and you can bring these modular reactors in by barge up the Red Sea and establish a site in Aqaba where you would desalinate water and generate electricity. And the brine from that water would be returned back to the Red Sea or put out into evaporation basins, whatever. And then it's a 300-kilometer pipeline between Aqaba and Amman. And then you would start by developing water and power around Aqaba, and then let the system spread to the north as more and more land became irrigable, and there was more production. There was inexpensive electricity, and you will let the system pay for itself as it developed. So you don't need a huge international consortium, and you don't require the Israelis to come to peace with the Palestinians. It can all be done in a relatively stable political situation, one country involved, which will all be done in Jordan. And of course, here's the West Bank. Water from this system could be used to supply the West Bank. It could be used to bring water over to Gaza, which would give the Palestinians their own independent supply of water and power without requiring them to come to what may be very, very difficult political solution with Israel. So that is the very concept there. Jordan to us is one of the last refuges of the Middle East. It has absorbed a lot of refugees from Palestine, Iraq, and Syria. The population now is over close to twice that was planned because of the influx of refugees. The water supplies cannot keep up with this. Power supplies are horribly inadequate either. And Jordan has no oil or gas. It must basically import all of its fuels. So that makes them a prime candidate for this project. Here is a graph that we prepared. Now, this red line is not the actual supply of water. It's what we estimate is required as a minimum to supply an advanced economy in Jordan. Between this first year is 2016. So over the 25 years from 2016, so it's up to 2050. This is the amount of water we think is necessary. The green line is the amount that is available from all the existing supplies in 2016. And unfortunately, it includes the Red Dead project, which so far is a standstill. And you see that starting in about 2025, even with the Red Dead project and the various aquifer projects, the supply begins to diminish, because of groundwater depletion. And so the situation is going to get worse over the next 25 years if we don't do something. The natural supplies just are not enough to get it done. So here is a diagram of a thing called a multiple effect desalinator. It does not run on electricity. It runs on heat. And basically, you put in feed water, salt water comes in on this side, along with heat. And basically, as you said the supply water in here, and then the steam is condensed, and you create from the system, and so you can operate this thing with really low, from a standpoint of energy production, a low grade heat. It doesn't have to even be steam. It could be 180 degrees centigrade. And these things these thermal desals units can use heat that would otherwise be wasted and generate fresh water. Kind of a rule of thumb is for every 100 megawatts of electrical output from your power plant, you can generate 10 million gallons a day which is about 40 million liters a day of fresh water. So this plant like this, 100 megawatt plant, can produce, like in Abu Dhabi, they're producing 400 million gallons of water a day from an output of 4.6 gigawatts of electricity. And in Abu Dhabi, where they're doing this with natural gas. Now, I think the Emirates is they're seeing the handwriting on the wall too, because they are also studying switching over to nuclear power. Which every bit of water in Abu Dhabi that they run the city, basically it's a large city, is all off of desalinated water and all off of natural gas. Now they could switch that over to nuclear and just keep going indefinitely. In a typical 24-hour period, the electrical demand will rise and fall. You can take your power plant and run it at its peak efficiency level, and then when the electrical demand is down during the early morning and night, you can generate more fresh water, which is a very, very efficient way of doing this. A very good idea. So molten salt reactors are ideally suited to this technology because they operate at high temperatures. They're cooled with salt, molten salt, which melts at 700 degrees and doesn't boil for several thousand. It's a huge liquid range. So they are inherently stable. They don't require water for cooling. They're passively safe. You can turn them off. And at Oak Ridge, when they were running one in the 60s, they would turn it off on the weekends. And then the heat from the reactor goes into a secondary heat exchanger where it generates steam, and that steam can be used for water and power generation. The only water that's required is makeup for the boiler, because if you're running a steam boiler, you obviously need some makeup, but that could come from your desalinated water. So it's a great application for a desert country. The economics of the system, at least when we looked at it a few years ago, 1,000 megawatt power plant, which would generate 6.3 million megawatt hours of electricity at a reasonable retail rate, that would generate about 850, between the water and power, that system would generate $850 million a year. But the capital costs, including construction and capital recovery, are about half of that. And so it would also generate 137 million cubic meters of fresh water a day, which would, I think that's almost doubles Jordan's freshwater supply, that from a single plant. And it would have a benefit cost ratio of 1.8 to 1, which is a pretty good, it's hard to beat. So that's what I have to share with you. And I can just say that it's interesting. One of the frustrations I've had in getting the United States government to pay attention to this is they don't have it. There's not a lot of interest. The United States has been fallen into this regulatory malaise where the function of government is to stop innovation and to regulate everything to death. And one of the nice things about the BRICS nations is that they are an independent governmental source, right? Right now, the U.S. is not working on molten salt reactors except for a few small private companies. This development is slow and is poorly funded. The Department of Energy is not actively promoting this development. They kind of take this hands-off approach, but they ensure that nothing happens because they have their hands on the regulatory levers, which prevents companies from doing any productive work. So tremendous amount of work is being done in Canada, China, and India. And this is, from my perspective, this is great because these countries can actually, I know that Chinese got a lot of information from Oak Ridge, And they said, this is wonderful. We're going to go and build these. We're going to build one of these molten salt thorium breeder reactors, which I believe they've either got one very close to coming online, or it might already be online. It's hard to say, but I know they've been working on it. And so that hopefully we can instill in the United States the same, remember in the 60s, the idea of the missile gap. Everyone was worried about the Russians having more missiles than the United States. So maybe we can also light the fire under the U.S. With the thorium reactor gap, and that would be a way to get things going. But if I would advocate an international effort for all countries to share technology and to develop the thorium breeder reactor. There are 6 million tons of known thorium on the planet, and every ounce of thorium can be used to fuel a nuclear reactor. And these reactors do not generate waste. They generate valuable isotope byproducts. It really would be a game changer in human development. Basically, an almost inexhaustible supply of energy, which could be used anywhere on the planet to develop local economies. And Jordan and the Middle East would be a great place to start. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, William D'Orio. That's exactly what we need, a game changer. Let's bring up the panel, the entire panel, for our discussion. We still have some time. Who do we have? We have Jason Ross. We have Mr. Andreev. We have Dr. Kem, William D'Orio. Somebody else? Is Helga also coming on the panel?
No.
No? Okay. Then I would like to say, before we start, we're entering, according to some news that comes from Pentagon sources and also from Israeli army and other news sources of the Middle East, the strikes of Iran have now begun against Israel. So we're entering a very dangerous and tense period. So we have to really focus on getting our work out. So, but I would like to pass on the the ball to Jason, and maybe just you were at the front end of the presentations. Now we've reached the other end. What is your impression of what you've seen and heard so far?
Well, I think that we have explored this subject with some more detail, which is good, which I was looking forward to thinking through more about water in the region, about technologies for addressing the shortage of water. We learned about the unique benefits or properties of thorium reactors and about the Red Sea to Dead Sea connection as having the sort of ease of completion, being that it's in only one nation. We also talked about how water should be looked at from an energy perspective. There's only so much water coming down naturally, and if we want more, the question is how are we going to create it or pump it and so forth, so that the issues of development, the issues of energy, the issues of nuclear power really all come together here. And I think that is important, because a question that often comes up on the Oasis plan that I've heard from a lot of people is, why are you proposing putting nuclear plants in the middle of a war zone? Are you crazy? How could you possibly get these things built? And I think that the energy needs, and also for the particular case of Jordan, as we just heard, which doesn't have the kind of hydrocarbon wealth that many other nations in the area have, provide a good answer to that question about why a higher energy form isn't just better because of saving effort and resources and so forth. It might indeed be necessary to get the project off the ground at all. So that's my thoughts. I've got some more specific thoughts, but maybe we'll just see what comes up with questions and so forth.
Anyone else from the panel that wants to react to someone else's presentation? You can just raise your hand and signal that you want to say something. Okay, William, yeah, go ahead.
As to putting nuclear power plants in a war zone, civilian nuclear plants, even standard boiling water reactors, are terribly unsuited. They don't make nuclear weapons. Because when you take the fuel and put it into a nuclear reactor for more than a few weeks, the material that comes out of it is contaminated with isotopes. And I'm sure Dr. Kem can probably elaborate on this better than I can, but it's not suitable for nuclear weapons. You need a specifically designed reactor in order to create plutonium that's suitable for weapons. Now, a thorium reactor is even less suitable because the thorium fuel cycle does not create plutonium-239. It's too low. It starts off too low on the periodic table. So that is a good reason why we could use this technology anywhere without fear of proliferation. And
let me bring up a couple of
be able to elaborate on that.
Anyone? Sorry, didn't want to cut you off. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'd bring up a couple of questions that have come to us. All right. Well, there's a question from Scott Gibbons. He's a geopolitical urban and transportation advisor in North Carolina, United States. He says, hello, the plan for creating water and energy resources is as visionary today as it was when it was first conceived. One of the things that has changed is the technology of production, such that now there is more industrial capacity than needed for world demand. If the Oasis plan were initiated, the most urgent objective would be the establishment of not just immediate employment in construction activities, but also the creation of competitive business enterprises and the holistic development and reconstruction of human settlements in a more efficient and modern format, such as those which are conceived in the plans for NEOM in Saudi Arabia and Nusantara in Indonesia. In order to achieve this, a specialized, powerful, and effective institution would be needed. How can this be best established? Anyone wants to tackle this? Okay, Dr. Kem, go ahead.
What I can say is that, as I was saying earlier, we have to start looking at technology beyond borders. Now, interesting that you mentioned Indonesia. I was guest speaker at a nuclear conference in Hanoi in Vietnam. And I was talking there about the wide spaces in South Africa and how we would have power lines over desert sands and large areas that are rather arid. And in the audience was the gentleman, Dr. Arnold Soritsino, who was a nuclear chief in Indonesia. And I always recall him saying, you've got a problem about getting your power lines over long distances of sand. He said, we've got to cross water between all the Indonesian islands. And I must say that hadn't occurred to me about Indonesia. So the idea of trying to get electricity onto all those Indonesian islands without trying to run cables over the water, of course, is quite a challenge. And this is why the small modular reactors are ideal for them. We've heard the other gentleman talking about the molten salt reactors, which is one approach. Our reactor uses balls about the size of a tennis ball, graphite balls with uranium grains inside, and we cool it with helium gas going through. We've chosen that approach to be very versatile. But the point is that with these small reactors now, as I indicated, you can put them wherever you like under the control of different people. Ours does not need a large body of water, so it's not constrained to put it on the coastline to use the ocean for cooling, as many of the bigger reactors of days gone by needed. So we've got to be able to understand that the technology basis of the future is there. It's fixed. The electricity and the water are fundamental to existence. And as I indicated, the amount of water on the planet is fixed. So we've got to look at how do you keep recycling this water and how do you keep moving the water around. So yes, I think we need to look at independent like technological centers, and then politically, how are those controlled? And there's absolutely no doubt that a capitalistic type of approach is required. People are going to do it because it's in their interest to do it. You can't have this green extremism where they go around saying no rules, we do our own thing, and somehow somebody is going to make society work, but not them, but they want to benefit from it. So I think it's a very interesting psychological and political challenge to enable the technology to supply what mankind requires. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to react to the question? Otherwise, I'd go to one from, I think it's a lady called Ying, a Chinese lady, from the China Media Group. And she says, new technologies are a double-edged sword in history and nowadays. I appreciated Madame LaRouche's and every other distinguished guest's speech. The China Media Group's third forum will be held at the end of April. The topic is New Technologies' Benefit for the World. Do you have any message and suggestions for the forum? And how would you say China is contributing to world peacekeeping? That's a good question.
Well, thank you.
Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, oh, well, I'll just, okay, I'll start. So the role of China in peacekeeping, I would look at this in two different ways. One is direct efforts by Chinese diplomats to achieve peace in various areas. The most notable, in my view, is the Ukraine situation, where Envoy Li Hui has been having meetings. He's been going to Moscow. He's been going to Kiev. China put forward in February 2023, about a year ago, 1 year after the beginning of the conflict, a 12-point outline of how a peace conference would work. That's very helpful. The other indirect way that China is contributing, I think, is both through its economic development, which means that it's showing a path to growth that other countries can benefit from, taking whatever lessons are appropriate for their nation, and in doing that, showing a different way of approaching the world. China has spent enormous amounts of money on infrastructure, while the United States has spent enormous amounts of money on military conflict. And how well has that worked out for us? So, China grows, the U.S. slows. And I think the contrast is becoming pretty apparent to many nations around the world.
My colleague told me that you, Mr. Andreev, have raised your digital hand. I cannot see it from here, so but of course you can speak. But it would be better for me if you just raised your physical hand.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that what you have said about the media news as of now, again, this new cycle of violence, which definitely brings sufferings of people in the Middle East. This is a horrible situation. That is why our today's discussion is so important. It's absolutely necessary to have the paradigm shift, or whatever we can call it. The Miss LaRouche today's morning said that we need cognitive jump. We can call it in different ways, but definitely it is insanity to do the same thing again and again, counting on the different results. And this quote is very very suitable for the Israeli-Palestine settlement and conflict in general. As for the new technologies, from one hand, the topic, the application of new technologies have two sides of the coin. From one perspective, modern technologies, new technologies should facilitate our life and to make some changes for people prosperity. Another issue is that new technology should be safe for people, and that is why risk analysis and the possible danger should be studied before we apply new technologies, including the artificial technologies, including in the sphere which I'm responsible in my job. It is humanitarian actions. That's what I wanted to say. And there was another question just before I intended to react, but maybe I can continue on a later
The one on
stage.
China, maybe, or which one was it? Anyway, okay, we'll go to the next one, unless, okay, Dr. Kem, go ahead. You want to?
I think what we need is governments and society needs to come up with mechanisms where technology people and non-technology people get together to discuss new technologies as they're coming about. Because what tends to happen is that the technology people come up with a new technology, then start selling it into the market, and it takes people by surprise. And then you later discover what's potentially bad. Now, for many years, I've done strategic studies for companies. And I go along to a company for a day session or a 2-day session, and they say, these are our new company advances. We're now using different packaging for our products and so on. So you start to analyze this. Then I say at some point, well, now we're going to invest an hour or two in studying what's wrong or potentially bad. And usually they're surprised and say, no, there's nothing wrong. It's a great idea. Then you start to study what can go wrong, and always things come out. They come along and they're going to put it all into a new box. Then you look into it, you discover that the new box is a slightly larger, and you will no longer get 24 boxes in a larger box. They've got to redesign the larger box. Then the larger one won't fit in the truck. Those sorts of things. So that's on a day-to-day level in the company. They're always surprised when you discover, by just sitting and thinking carefully, what's going to go wrong with what they thought was a new good idea. Now, we've seen things like Facebook, for example. In the beginning, I'm sure nobody realized that Facebook would lead to abductions and to murders. Nobody sat down and said, look, if we bring about Facebook, it'll cause people to induce others to go and meet them on street corners at night time or something, and it leads to a murder. That's happened. So these are the sort of things that you need to look at and try and get the idea of new technologies discussed as they're coming about. But the science and engineering fraternity tends to say, oh, look, the rest of the world doesn't understand us. So we sit quietly around our own tea room table and talk about our things. We don't tell anybody until we've done it. And somehow we have to put something in place where earlier on the science people can say, you know, what's coming down the line is the following, and in the next year or 2 or 3, it's going to come into practice. And try to get people to discuss what's good about it, what's bad about it, and how will it fit in with current systems that there are. Because there's going to be a lot of dislocation taking place if you don't do that. And as much as there'll be a lot of benefit, there's also going to be problems which then need to be fixed and can be quite damaging before you discover what's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions that came in not only via email, but also on our YouTube chat. And one is from Munashe, I don't know, Munashe. Question, how can the Oasis plan address the specific challenges and needs of war-torn countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and other countries in Southwest Asia? And what role can international cooperation play in implementing this plan? Who of the gentlemen wants to make the beginning? Jason, you're smiling.
Okay.
So
All right, I'm smiling. The Oasis plan itself, I think, connects regionally. So, you know, Syria, which was asked in the question in particular, would benefit. I mean, Syria is right next to, well, Syria is part of this whole water basin, so the benefits would be very direct there. In terms of an approach and thinking through countries like Yemen or Afghanistan, which are a little further afield, I think that the case of Afghanistan is a very good one. Afghanistan is a nation where there is a political uncertainty, a political difficulty with the fact that countries are not recognizing the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan because the government, the authorities in place aren't considered to be representative of the desire of the people. People think the Taliban is an illegitimate government. And as a result, there has been a tremendous problem in aid and development agencies or even corporations that want to do business and work that way on the local economy, being able to get into the place. They just worry there's too much political risk by this non-recognition. Nonetheless, the perspective for the country, now that it's finally totally free of international, there's no armed forces in Afghanistan from outside anymore. You know, it's got a lot of potential with the Kush-Tepe Canal in the north, and the perspective of, hey, we don't need to wait for the political resolution to start trying to move forward on the economic issues, I think is an important lesson to take here. Now, in this case, you know, you're not going to be able to build you can't build out the Oasis plan without resolving the warfare and the fighting, for sure. But I think it's a similar message in terms of how having that future perspective transforms what's potential on the ground.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, William.
So the beauty of the Oasis plan is that it can begin with a small, you don't have to do the whole thing at once. It can grow organically. For instance, if the idea of beginning in southern Jordan and with building some installations at Aqaba and letting it grow up to the north is a demonstration of how this kind of system can benefit the local people. And so it's a question of, do we need to build a massive worldwide governmental control agency, or can we let the system grow organically from the bottom up? And I prefer the second alternative, where it's more of an organic bottom up type of solution, starting small and letting it grow. So that's what I would like to suggest.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to add something that Lyndon LaRouche had said at a conference of the Institute of Oriental Studies in Moscow in April 1994. You'll find it online on the webpage of EIR. And he said, I stated that the efforts to find a political solution to the Middle East conflict would not succeed under any circumstances because we had extreme bitterness which could not be settled at the political bargaining table. Before we could have a political solution, we had to have an economic self-interest by both parties in a political solution. And he talks about that they already had it, the project was already progressing very much. By early 1976, there was a very significant effort to bring this to success, but because of a very radical shift in politics in Israel at the time, our efforts failed, and that happened multiple times. But I think this time we don't have the time, and we cannot afford it to have it failed again. I'll bring up another question. One is, there's actually two questions on the role of Africa and one on the role of the BRICS. Let me go to the BRICS first. Manfred Theil from Berlin says, we need to move beyond the planning stage and start implementing the Oasis plan, but also move forward with it's called Side Street Project, but this is a translation from German into English, I don't know. People need to see how this will benefit their future lives. We have already heard examples of this from China. The BRICS Plus need to create new examples here, reminding the governments responsible for apartheid of their responsibilities will not work. Economic progress, information and education, and the history of peoples must be brought together. The steps taken by a former French colony to send its occupiers packing are a good example. Not only Russia has the opportunity to close these gaps for the benefit of its citizens, but also other rich BRICS plus and aspirant countries are in a position to do so. This is not a question, rather a statement, but maybe it provokes a statement from you, gentlemen. Anyone? All right, go ahead.
Well, as a South African, what happens with us is that we feel that the traditional Western world is often pushing us around and treating us in an inferior manner and coming along with their solutions, which they expect will work here because they work there. And that's not the case. I mentioned earlier how big South Africa is. I'm in Pretoria right now, and the distance between Pretoria and Cape Town, which is at the bottom of South Africa, is the same distance as Rome to London. We have a beautiful but desolate area in South Africa called the Karoo. And it has little bushes about the height of your knee or your waist, and that's all. And you can drive hundreds of kilometers and not see a human or any animal. Now that Karoo is bigger than Germany. And we find that people will come, say, from Germany, telling us that they've got a system for producing electricity with wind and solar panels, and it's like this. But they've got this little system that will fit in our desert area, which is only a remote area that people go to experience driving through it. And so then they say, that's going to work for your country. Now, what's happening with other African countries? The same. They're turning up at other African countries where the geography and the social conditions and a whole lot of things are completely different, and saying, just adopt our solution because we're the important ones and we know better than you. And this has happened a lot in the past, and then they effectively bully other countries into adopting their solutions, and then they find they don't work. Like now, a lot of this wind and solar that has been pushed into other African countries is just not working. It's all well and good to have solar doing something for 3 hours in the middle of the day, but solar does not provide any electricity for 24 hours. And so now put batteries in. But they usually admit to say if you put batteries in, you're going to at least triple the size of the solar collectors, and so on and so on and so on. So now a lot of the African countries are realizing, for example, our nuclear reactor, the HTML 100, is a solution because you have mining areas, for example, potential mining areas that are hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest power line. They can't run power, large-scale power, all that way because of the expense and general problems. But if you put a nuclear reactor there, you can do it. But we've got to stop having this case where the advanced world says, we know what's better for you, now just toe the line and do as you're told. And this is amongst the BRICS grouping now. There's this sensitivity amongst the BRICS grouping saying, we're going to get together because we're similar and we're going to look after ourselves, and we're tired of getting pushed around. And I think it's important for the traditional Western world to realize that the sentiment is there, and they must stop acting like Big Brother and pushing us around, because it doesn't do any good. It just it creates an antagonism that you don't want. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really an irony. Mr. Yeah, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, Mr. Andreev. Yeah, it's you. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Just a short remark about the BRICS. The role of BRICS countries, members, is significantly increasing in the international arena. I'm sure that you're aware about the decisions to expand the membership of BRICS, and new institutions are being created, including the financial institutions. So the BRICS countries call for the respect for national values and norms, and all these. And by the way, the share of GDP of countries of BRICS has increased dramatically in the recent years, and it is quite close to the G7 group. So all this opens additional opportunities working together and for implementing such a large-scale infrastructural projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me bring up two last questions of tonight. They are all concerned with the role of Africa, but questions are not only directed to Dr. Kem, everybody else can respond to them. The first one is from Felix Corchaggio. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Felix, President, it was directed at Helga at the time, but anyway. He says, thanks for mentioning Africa in your speech. We Africans are excited to contribute to the end of the war in Gaza. What can we do in our part of the world to bring peace in Gaza? Okay, what can we do from our part of the world to bring peace in Gaza? And Betty Jennings says, since South Africa is a nation which has a nuclear power plant providing electricity, can the knowledgeable presenter speak how this has benefited the economy of South Africa and its neighbors?
I can comment on the nuclear.
Yeah.
It was interesting. This year, the Koeberg nuclear power station, which is a 2,000 megawatt power station, is 40 years old and is currently undergoing a major refurbishment, which will set it right for another 40 years. It's currently producing South Africa's cheapest electricity by far, and it's very stable and very reliable, and therefore easy to control, as against wind and solar, which are very erratic and unpredictable, and therefore very difficult to control. So the nuclear has been highly beneficial. You see it particularly now that after running for 40 years very successfully, it continues to produce very cheap electricity. South Africa produces and consumes about 50% of the electricity of the whole of the continent of Africa. There's a lot more electricity required in Africa. There are countries nearby us that are something like 15% or maybe 20% electrified. So the only honorable thing they can do is double the electricity consumption, then double it again, then double it again, then double it again. And when we get these extreme greenie do-gooders who come here and say, you must stop expanding your electricity consumption, stop right now, because you've got to save the planet for your grandchildren. You say, hang on, why am I saving the planet for my grandchildren when my children are going to die now because you're blocking us from expanding our electricity consumption right now? And it's that sort of thing which leads to bad feelings, and it's just plain silly. And people realize that it's silly to say save your grandchildren, but your own children are going to die in between. So, unfortunately, the whole Gaza affair has gone so far now that you're not going to be able to stop it very easily. It shouldn't have started in the first place. To me, it was very interesting to hear Jason talk about the Syrian revolt that started because of the water being reduced to the farmers. I didn't know that. But that shows you that had that been realized at the time and they'd been able to produce more water for the farmers wouldn't have ended up precipitating the revolt that ended up in all the trouble. And this is very much the case all over. And while earlier I said what we need is to try and have macro technology projects, like looking at water for the Southern African region, electricity for the Southern African region, and having discussions how we can technologically solve these, instead of so often just the politicians sitting and fighting with each other about who's in charge and who's got the most control. It's rather say, how do we supply what the people want, the basics like water and electricity, and how do we get railway lines running, and so on. Those, are, to my mind, should be much higher up the priority than all the political bickering that goes on for so much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, to respond to the first of the questions that you had raised about what can Africans or African nations do, I mean, I would look at a couple of examples of what's already happening. South Africa went to the International Court of Justice and succeeded in its efforts to get a series of orders from that court for humanitarian aid, for not committing genocide, for basically calling on Israel to stop what it's doing. That was a diplomatic success for South Africa in achieving this, of being the country that brought this onto the world stage. That's an example. Another one is the fact that outside voices can play an important role, I believe, in shifting world opinion. The African Union or African President's peace proposal for Ukraine, which has involved, I think, five presidents from African nations, including the head of the AU, going to Kiev, going to Moscow, and talking through the implications for the entire world, and themselves in particular, of the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine, and asking or thinking through what they could do in terms of contributing to stop that. So I think those two are examples of things that have already been done, and I think that what's most important is that people in the world do a lot more thinking and have a lot more specific ideas about what the future should look like. Look, people get together and they talk about things. You know, sometimes people talk about politics, they talk about whatever's presented as like the most current issue sometimes. Is Trump a dictator? I don't know, or, you know, things like that. As opposed to sitting down and talking about, hey, what do you think about our power sources? Or what should we do to address the shortage of water in this desert area of the world, and that kind of thing. So I think just broadening the discussion overall in your international contacts is something that everybody anywhere in the world can do, and is what's needed to shift global discussion.
Thank you so much. If no other hand goes up right now, I think we are at the point where we should wrap up the panel. I felt very motivated and encouraged by statements of Ambassador Hassassian, who said, you know, the Oasis plan has a great resonance globally, will be taken seriously. And also Ambassador Sisulu said that the Oasis plan will ignite a lot of interest. So I think this work is really, we have laid the foundation to really spread the word. Helga said explicitly we have to build a support base for the Oasis plan, and then have the other steps, you know, of defining concrete projects, etc., drafting a project program, etc., and have another conference. So I would like to give everyone the opportunity to say some wrap-up words, if you would like to do that. And if you don't like
well,
to do that,
I would make the comment that how I started initially, that over centuries, it's scientists and engineers that have tended to continue talking during times of conflict. And I would like to see that sort of thing happening again, that we look at the problems, because scientists and engineers are also trained to be realists. The gravity causes something to fall down at an acceleration of 9.81. That's it. You cannot say, let's pass a rule to change it. That's it. So scientists and engineers tend to be realists. So I would like to see there to be much more international technological discussion. How do we solve each other's technical problems on a wider front? Because they say the world is becoming a smaller place due to all the modern advances. And that's definitely the case. We see cell phone networks around the world and so on. So I would like to see much more of the technology people being also politically aware and understanding what is necessary to stabilize society. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have troubles into the future. Thank you.
thank you. William, please go ahead.
So I'd just like to endorse that and point out that the technology has been around for a long time. We've had this technology. The problem is it's political, because you have to have enough people who are willing to implement a project in order to get it going. And so hopefully, as people see as the needs become more apparent, we will be able to find a few good, well-placed projects to begin to create some demonstrations of how this technology can work. The Jordan project is a good one. There are other projects that we could implement. Also, again, it's just we can't wait for the global elites to come down with the solution. We have to really begin a grassroots effort. So let's keep it up. I'm curious as what do we do next? What do you guys see as our next step?
Mr. Andreev, do you want to say wrap up comments?
Thank you. I just want to say that thank you as a moderator of today's discussion, and all the panelists for their very interesting views and thoughts, and of course those who spent their time with us. That's all. Thank you.
That's it, I would say. I just wanted to say to everyone out there, if you like the work of the Schiller Institute, don't hesitate to become a member. Just go to our website, schillerinstitute.com, and I think you'll find the right button or how to become a member and support us. Jason, do you want to say something?
I want to at least begin to address the question that William de Orio posed about where do we go next? Where do we do coming out of this? And there's a lot of activity going on focused on this region of the world right now. There are a lot of people calling for ceasefire. There are a lot of people saying the fighting must end. There are a lot of people saying the humanitarian aid must come in. I'll go on a flotilla if I have to. This kind of thing. I think that a measure of success will be in seeing more and more people saying, we need the Oasis plan. What are we doing fighting? This is the future of the region, especially because it also usefully challenges other axioms that people hold that they may believe are progressive or moving the planet in a better direction and aren't. I think that this also directly confronts the green issue through its call for transforming nature, of changing the environment, which is a good thing if it's done in a good way, and which we should not be afraid of doing out of concern for some endangered salamander or something like that. So those are a couple of thoughts. I think we've got to popularize this and then find other fora for holding discussions on this perspective and bringing more people into this to get a better idea of what the plan should look like, and also just make sure that when discussions on this topic are occurring, that this future orientation is injected, because I think it just dramatically changes the political terrain and could make an otherwise impossible resolution a possible one.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, to everyone on the panel. If you want to read more by Linda LaRouche, you can go to the LaRouche Legacy Foundation website. I think we have now volume 2 out of his complete works, and volume 2 is especially interesting because it addresses exactly the question that you, Jason, had raised in the beginning about what is the human mind, how do you educate the human mind, how does civilization progress, and he's talking a lot about classical music and classical art and so forth. Something that is also a lot of lacking, not only technology, but also beautiful art. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone out there asking good questions, intelligent questions. We need those. You've been listening to panel 2 of the Schiller Institute online conference on April the 13th, 2024 on the Oasis plan. And the panel 2 was called Oasis Plan, the Physical Foundation for the Economic Development of Southwest Asia. Thank you to everyone, and I wish everyone, according to where you are in the time zone, a good day, good evening, or a good bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.